Lily had always dreamed of discovering something that would change the world. As a young girl growing up in a small town in Minnesota, she would spend hours reading about space exploration and alien civilizations. Her parents thought she was strange for spending so much time with her head in the clouds instead of focusing on practical things. But Lily knew that the universe was vast and full of mysteries, and she was determined to find them. Now, at 32 years old, she stood on the surface of Meridian with her heart pounding in her chest. The mission briefing had been clear. She was sent here to study the dragon population and determine if they could be saved from extinction. The Earth government was interested in establishing trade agreements with the dragon keepers of this world. But first they needed to understand the current state of the dragons and whether they could still be useful to human civilization. Lily had not expected to feel this way about the mission. She had trained for years to become emotionally detached during scientific observations. She had learned to separate her personal feelings from her professional responsibilities. Yet as she walked toward the cave where Arya lived, she could not shake the feeling that this moment was going to be significant. This moment was going to change everything. Arya emerged from the cave before Lily reached the entrance. The elf woman moved with the grace of someone who had been alive for far longer than Lily could comprehend. Her silver skin seemed to glow in the light of Meridian's twin suns, and her violet eyes held a sadness that made Lily's chest hurt just looking at them. Arya wore simple clothes made from what appeared to be dragon leather, and her hair was long and white like starlight. The elf woman studied Lily for a long moment before speaking. When she finally did speak, her voice was soft but carried a weight that suggested she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. She said that she had known a human would come eventually. The ancient texts spoke of a time when humans and elves would meet again, and perhaps this was the beginning of that prophecy. Lily wanted to ask Arya about this prophecy, but before she could speak, the blue dragon emerged from the cave. The creature was enormous, easily 3 times the size of an elephant. Its scales shimmered like sapphires in the sunlight, and its wings folded carefully against its sides. The dragon looked at Lily with an expression that was difficult to read. There was intelligence in those eyes, but there was also something missing, something absent that Lily could not quite name. The second dragon came next. This one was smaller than the first, but no less impressive. Its scales were bronze and red with patterns that seemed to shift and change as the light hit them. This dragon seemed more curious than the first one. It took a step toward Lily and lowered its massive head, sniffing the air around her. Lily held perfectly still, remembering her training about how to behave around potentially dangerous creatures. Arya placed a hand on the bronze dragon's neck and guided it gently backward. She explained that this was Ember, and the blue dragon was Ocean. They had been her companions for over 200 years, but they were dying. Not from any illness or physical ailment, but from something much more difficult to treat. They were dying from emotional emptiness. The dragons had lost the capacity to feel deep emotions, and without those feelings, they had lost the will to survive and reproduce. Lily asked how this could happen. Dragons seemed like creatures that should have strong emotions. They were powerful and intelligent. Arya sighed and led Lily into the cave. Inside, the temperature was cool, and the walls seemed to pulse with some kind of bioluminescent moss that provided a gentle blue light. The cave was vast, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The floor was smooth stone, worn by centuries of use. Arya explained that thousands of years ago the dragons of Meridian had been incredibly emotional creatures. They loved fiercely. They protected their young with determination, and they formed bonds that lasted their entire lives. But around 5,000 years ago, a catastrophic event had occurred. A meteor strike had changed Meridian's atmosphere, and the dragons had evolved to survive in this new environment. During this evolution, something had been lost. The emotional centers of their brains had shut down as a survival mechanism. The dragons could feel hunger and basic fear, but they could not feel love or hope or any of the complex emotions that made life worth living. For millennia, the dragons had survived without these emotions. They lived like machines, eating and sleeping and occasionally mating without any genuine connection. But as Meridian's environment had changed again over the past century, the dragons had found that they could not adapt anymore. The world demanded more from them than just survival instincts. The world demanded that they care about their offspring, that they feel pride in their accomplishments, that they understand the beauty around them. Arya had dedicated her entire life to keeping Ocean and Ember alive because she believed that the dragons could be saved. She had read ancient texts that described what dragons were like when they could feel emotions, and she refused to believe that her companions were beyond help. She had tried everything. She had brought them the finest food. She had played music for them. She had even tried to use magic, but nothing worked. The dragons remained emotionally hollow, going through the motions of life without truly living. When Lily heard this story, something inside her shifted. She had come to Meridian as a scientist, ready to observe and document and make recommendations for her government. But now she understood that this was not about politics or trade agreements. This was about the fundamental question of whether a species could be saved and whether one determined individual could make a difference in the face of impossible odds. Lily told Arya that she wanted to help. She said that she did not have any magical abilities or scientific cures, but she had spent her whole life learning about human emotions and how they shaped behavior and motivation. Perhaps she could teach the dragons to feel again. Perhaps she could show them that emotions were not something to fear but something to embrace. Arya's expression changed. For the first time since Lily had arrived, the elf woman smiled. She said that perhaps the prophecy was true after all. Perhaps a human had indeed come to help restore what had been lost. She took Lily's hand and led her deeper into the cave, where Ocean and Ember waited in the shadows, still and silent, waiting for something they could not name. Lily knew that she was making a commitment that could change her entire life. She was choosing to stay in this cave with an ancient elf woman and two emotionless dragons, attempting something that had never been done before. She was choosing hope over certainty and connection over safety. As she looked into Ocean's empty eyes, she whispered a silent promise that she would not leave until these magnificent creatures learned to feel again. The first week in the cave was the most difficult week of Lily's life. She had abandoned her comfortable research station and the regular supply shipments from her vessel. Instead, she had committed herself to living in close quarters with Arya and the two dragons. Her colleagues back on Earth thought she had gone insane. Her supervisor sent her 3 messages asking her to return to the station, but Lily ignored them all. She knew what she needed to do, and she was going to do it no matter what anyone else thought. Each morning, Lily would wake before dawn and prepare a simple breakfast. She had brought some supplies from the research station, but most of her food now came from the local area. Arya showed her which plants were edible and how to hunt the small creatures that lived in the forests surrounding the cave. Lily had never hunted before, and the first time she successfully caught a rabbit, she felt both proud and guilty. She understood now that survival on Meridian meant taking life to sustain your own. After breakfast, Lily would sit with Ocean. The blue dragon spent most of its time in the same position, lying against the far wall of the cave. Its massive body barely moved except for the rise and fall of its breath. When Lily first started sitting near it, Ocean did not seem to notice her presence at all. But she continued anyway, day after day, sitting in silence or speaking softly about her life back on Earth. She told Ocean about her childhood, about running through fields and climbing trees and watching the stars at night. She described what it felt like to be part of a human family, to have people who cared about you and worried about you and celebrated when you succeeded. She talked about her father's laugh and her mother's kindness and her younger brother's terrible jokes that made her smile despite being awful. Arya would listen from across the cave, and sometimes she would nod as if she understood exactly what Lily was trying to do. The elf woman did not interrupt or offer advice. She simply continued with her daily tasks of caring for the dragons, bringing them food and water and cleaning their scales with dedicated attention. Lily realized that this was what love looked like. Love was showing up day after day, even when there was no response, even when progress seemed impossible. Ember was different from Ocean. The bronze and red dragon was more active, moving around the cave and sometimes venturing outside to the area surrounding it. Ember was also more curious about Lily. The dragon would watch her as she sat with Ocean, and sometimes Ember would come closer, tilting its massive head in a way that suggested the creature was trying to understand what Lily was doing. During the second week, Lily changed her approach with Ember. Instead of just sitting and talking, she began to ask questions. She knew that Ember probably could not understand human speech, but she spoke anyway. She asked the dragon whether it had ever wanted something more than just food and sleep. She asked whether the dragon had ever felt the desire to create something beautiful or to protect something precious. She asked whether Ember had ever felt lonely. On the 15th day, something small but significant happened. Lily was sitting with Ocean and telling a story about a time when she had been afraid and sad, when she had thought about giving up on her dreams. She was describing how her mother had held her hand and told her that the hardest moments in life were also the moments when you discovered how strong you truly were. As Lily spoke, she felt tears running down her cheeks. She had not meant to cry, but the emotions of those memories had overwhelmed her. Ocean's head moved. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it was a change from the complete stillness that had characterized the dragon before. The blue dragon turned its head slightly so that one massive eye could look directly at Lily. The creature was watching her cry, and there was something different in that gaze. There was something that might have been attention, might have been awareness, might even have been the beginnings of understanding. Lily continued talking, not stopping the tears, not trying to compose herself. She let Ocean see her in her vulnerable moment, and she continued describing what it felt like to be human and to have emotions that could overwhelm you. She talked about how sadness and joy were connected, how you could not truly feel one without being capable of feeling the other. She explained that emotions were not something to be ashamed of. They were the most important part of being alive. That same evening, Ember did something unexpected. The bronze dragon came and lay down beside Lily while she was sitting with Ocean. The dragon's massive body curved around her, not threatening but protective. Arya made a sound that was almost like a sob. She said that she had not seen Ember show any voluntary physical behavior that suggested affection or protection in over a century. This was progress, she whispered. This was real progress. The third week brought more changes. Ocean began to respond more consistently to Lily's presence. The dragon would position itself to better see her, and sometimes the blue dragon would make low sounds that seemed almost like communication. The sounds were not words, but they were deliberate and intentional, and they seemed to increase when Lily told particularly emotional stories. Ember grew more active, often venturing outside the cave and returning with interesting objects. Once the dragon brought back a crystalline stone that glowed with internal light. Another time, Ember brought a plant with flowers that smelled like honey. These objects seemed to be offerings, though Arya cautioned Lily against reading too much into the behavior. But Lily was convinced that Ember was trying to communicate something, trying to show that the dragon understood on some level that Lily was important, that she was worth acknowledging. By the end of the third week, Lily realized that she had changed too. She had come to Meridian with a research agenda and scientific detachment. She was leaving that all behind. She was living now, truly living in a way that she had never experienced before. She was part of something that mattered, something that transcended her own comfort or career advancement. Arya noticed the change in Lily as well. One evening, the elf woman asked why Lily had really given up everything to stay in this cave with two emotionless dragons and an ancient being who had lost hope centuries ago. Lily thought about the question carefully before answering. She said that she had always known that her real purpose was to help others, to connect with beings across whatever distances separated them. She had just never found the right opportunity to do it until now. She said that she felt more alive in this cave than she had ever felt in her entire life, even though she was living in conditions that most humans would find unbearable. Arya took Lily's hand and squeezed it gently. The elf woman said that perhaps Lily had always been meant to come to Meridian. Perhaps this was what destiny looked like. Two beings from completely different worlds and species, brought together by circumstance and choice, working toward a goal that seemed impossible, but that they both believed in completely. By the fourth week, Lily had fallen into a rhythm with her new life in the cave. She had sent a message to her supervisor explaining that she was conducting extended field research, and that she would check in monthly with her findings. The response she received was harsh and suggested that she might lose her position if she continued to deviate from her original mission parameters. Lily read the message once and then deleted it. She had already made her choice, and no threat to her career could change her mind. The weather on Meridian began to change. The purple sky seemed to darken, and the twin suns appeared smaller than they had before. Arya explained that they were entering what the elves called the dark season, a time when Meridian's orbit carried it farther from its suns. During the season, the days became shorter and the nights grew longer. Many creatures on Meridian entered a state similar to hibernation, conserving their energy until the world warmed again. This season was crucial for Lily's work with the dragons. She had been making slow but steady progress with both Ocean and Ember, but she knew that this progress could easily be lost if the dragons retreated into themselves during the dark season. She needed to accelerate her emotional teaching before the long darkness set in completely. Lily changed her approach. Instead of just telling stories, she began to involve the dragons more directly. She would ask Arya for instruments that produced sound, and she used these to create music that she hoped might resonate with something deep inside the dragon's ancient consciousness. She found a stringed instrument similar to a harp, and she played simple melodies while speaking about emotions and connections. One afternoon, as Lily was playing the harp and singing a song about hope and resilience, something miraculous occurred. Ocean began to make sounds in response. The blue dragon's deep voice vibrated through the cave, creating harmonies that seemed almost intentional. The dragon was not just making noise. The dragon was singing. The sounds were primitive and rough, but they were undeniably musical, and they carried an emotional weight that made Lily's breath catch in her throat. Arya wept openly when she heard Ocean's song. The elf woman fell to her knees and buried her face in her hands. She said that she had not heard that sound in 250 years. She said that Ocean was remembering somehow the songs of its ancient ancestors. The dragon was reaching back through centuries of emotional emptiness and finding something that had never truly died, only sleeping. That night, Lily did not sleep. She stayed awake playing the harp and listening to Ocean's responses. The dragon's voice grew stronger and clearer as the hours passed. By dawn, Ocean was producing complex harmonics that suggested the dragon was not just repeating Lily's melodies, but creating its own musical responses. It was communication. It was emotion finally breaking through the barriers that had isolated the dragon for so long. Ember watched these interactions carefully. The bronze dragon seemed to be processing what was happening with its companion, as if trying to understand this new phenomenon that was occurring in the cave. On the 5th day of Ocean's singing, Ember began to produce sounds as well. They were different from Ocean's harmonies, more rhythmic and percussion-like, as if the bronze dragon was providing a foundation for the blue dragon's melody. Arya brought out more instruments. She retrieved objects that Lily had not seen before, items that suggested Arya had once collected many things and had cared about music and art and beauty. There was a drum made from dragon skin. There were wind instruments carved from crystalline stone. There were bells that chimed with pure tones. As Lily played these instruments, she incorporated Ocean and Ember's vocalizations into a developing symphony of dragon and human music. 3 weeks into the dark season, Arya told Lily something that changed everything. The elf woman explained that she had been wrong about the dragon's emotional capabilities. She had believed that the dragons were missing emotions entirely, but what she now understood was that the dragons had emotions but had no context to express them. The emotions were trapped inside, locked away because the dragons had no framework for understanding them or communicating them to others. Lily had provided that framework. Through stories and music and her own emotional vulnerability, she had shown the dragons that emotions were not dangerous. She had given them a new language through which to express feelings they had perhaps always possessed. The dragons were not learning to feel. They were learning to express what they had always felt but had been unable to acknowledge. This realization shifted something fundamental in how Lily approached her work. She began to ask the dragons questions, to create space for them to respond emotionally to situations. She would describe scenarios and ask how the dragons thought they would feel in those situations. She would play music and watch to see which pieces elicited stronger responses. She was beginning to have actual conversations with beings who had been silent for millennia. Ocean became her partner in this process. The blue dragon seemed eager to explore its newfound emotional vocabulary. When Lily spoke about courage, Ocean's songs became louder and more aggressive. When she described loneliness, Ocean's melodies became soft and melancholic. When she spoke about love and connection, Ocean produced harmonies that were so beautiful they made Arya and Lily both cry. Ember followed Ocean's lead, developing its own emotional responses. The bronze dragon seemed to specialize in expressing joy and playfulness. When Lily told jokes or created upbeat melodies, Ember's rhythmic vocalizations became almost dance-like, and the dragon would move around the cave with a lightness that suggested genuine happiness. As the dark season deepened and the world outside the cave became cold and dark, the cave itself began to feel warmer. The dragon's increasing emotional engagement seemed to generate actual heat, as if their awakening consciousness was literally warming their bodies and their spirits. Arya said that this was a sign of health and vitality. The dragons who could feel emotions also seemed to be stronger and more resilient. By the time the dark season reached its midpoint, Lily realized that the impossible had become possible. The dragons had emotions. They were expressing those emotions regularly. They were beginning to show signs of behavioral changes that suggested they were developing genuine personalities and preferences. Ocean seemed contemplative and somewhat melancholic but deeply focused. Ember seemed joyful and playful but also deeply loyal and protective. One evening, as Lily was preparing to sleep, both dragons came to her. They lay down on either side of her, creating a warm cocoon of dragon body around her small human form. The dragons did not move or make any sounds. They simply lay there, offering their warmth and presence. Lily understood that this was the ultimate communication. The dragons were saying without words that they felt safe with her. The dragons were saying that they trusted her. The dragons were saying that they loved her. The dark season began to fade as the world turned and carried Meridian closer to its suns once more. The purple sky started to lighten gradually, and the temperatures in and around the cave began to rise. This was the season of renewal on Meridian, when creatures that had hibernated through the dark months emerged to reclaim their territory and their lives. It was also the season when Arya told Lily that something significant was about to happen. The elf woman had been watching Ember with particular attention, studying the bronze dragon's behavior more carefully than ever before. When Lily asked what she was looking for, Arya explained that Ember was showing signs of fertility. After 250 years of emotional emptiness, Ember's awakening emotions seemed to be triggering physical changes as well. The dragon might be ready to lay eggs for the first time in centuries. Lily felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. The possibility of dragon eggs meant the possibility of new dragons entering the world. It meant that the species could potentially recover from the brink of extinction, but it also meant that everything needed to go perfectly. If Ember laid eggs and then lost the maternal instinct due to emotional setbacks, the eggs would never hatch. The opportunity could be lost forever. Arya increased the intensity of their emotional teachings. She worked with Lily to create scenarios that would strengthen Ember's maternal and protective instincts. They spoke about the concept of offspring and the responsibility of bringing new life into the world. They described what it meant to be a mother, to care for something so completely that you would sacrifice anything to protect it. They played music that was gentle and nurturing, and they told stories about dragons of ancient times who had been loving parents to their young. Ember responded to these teachings with intensity that surprised even Arya. The bronze dragon seemed to understand on a profound level what was being asked of her. The dragon's behavior became more and more focused on preparation. Ember began gathering soft materials and arranging them in a particular section of the cave. The dragon seemed to be building a nest, creating a safe space where eggs could be laid. Ocean watched these preparations with what seemed to be protective concern. The blue dragon remained close to Ember, and when Lily observed their interactions, she noticed that Ocean and Ember seemed to communicate with each other through their vocalizations. They seemed to be having conversations, discussing Ember's upcoming transformation and the changes that were occurring within her body. On a day when the purple sky was unusually clear and the twin suns shone brightly above Meridian, Ember entered her nest area and did not emerge for 3 days. Arya explained that this was normal, that the dragon needed privacy and safety during this intimate process. Lily could barely contain her anxiety. She spent those 3 days pacing around the cave, talking to Ocean about what might be happening, and trying to distract herself with preparations for the potential hatching of eggs. When Ember finally emerged from her nest, the bronze dragon looked exhausted but also radiant with a kind of pride and triumph that was unmistakable. Arya moved quickly to the nest area and let out a gasp of wonder. There, nestled in the soft materials that Ember had carefully arranged, were 3 eggs. They were smaller than Lily would have expected, with shells that shimmered bronze and red like Ember's own scales. Lily approached slowly and carefully, making no sudden movements that might disturb the dragon or her eggs. She could see that the eggs were warm to the touch, and inside each shell, She could make out shadowy movements that suggested living beings developing within. She thought she might weep from the joy and relief of this moment. After all the work and doubt and uncertainty, after all the emotional teaching and storytelling and connection building, something truly miraculous had occurred. Ember watched Lily examine the eggs, and the dragon made a sound that Arya identified immediately as protective vigilance. The elf woman explained that Ember was warning Lily not to touch the eggs too much, that the dragon was asserting her maternal authority and her determination to protect her offspring. This was exactly what they had wanted. This was the proof that Ember's emotions were working, that the dragon understood the concept of maternal responsibility and was committed to fulfilling it. Ocean approached the nest as well, moving carefully with deliberate gentleness. The blue dragon sniffed the eggs and then settled down beside Ember, curling protectively around the nest. Arya said that this was mating pair behavior, that Ocean was already taking on the role of protective partner and father. The blue dragon seemed to understand that these were eggs that needed protection and care, and Ocean was ready to provide both. Over the following days, a routine emerged in the cave. Ember spent most of her time near the nest, occasionally standing up to rotate the eggs and ensure they were being warmed properly. Ocean remained close by, providing support and protection. Lily and Arya brought food to Ember so that the dragon would not have to leave her nest. They kept the cave at a comfortable temperature, and they spoke softly around the eggs, creating an environment that seemed designed to nurture new life. Lily recorded everything in her journal, documenting the behavior of the dragons and the development of the eggs. These records would be crucial when she returned to Earth and had to report what had happened. She knew that many people back on Earth would be skeptical, would claim that this was impossible, that dragons could not recover emotional capacity in such a short time. But Lily had lived this experience. She had seen it happen. She knew it was real. 3 weeks after the eggs were laid, the first cracks began to appear in one of the shells. Ember made urgent vocalizations and called for Lily and Arya. The bronze dragon seemed to want their support and presence as the hatching occurred. Lily and Arya took their positions near the nest, but not so close as to interfere with the natural process. The hatching took hours. A tiny clawed foot broke through the shell, then a small head emerged. The baby dragon was no larger than a house cat, with scales that were barely developed and wings that looked impossibly fragile. The hatchling made weak sounds, and Ember responded immediately with gentle vocalizations and careful attention. The dragon mother was cleaning off the birthing fluid and helping her offspring adjust to the world outside the egg. When the second egg hatched several hours later, Ember was experienced and confident in her maternal role. When the third egg remained unhatched after a full day, Arya explained that this was sometimes natural, that not all eggs survived to hatching. But 2 out of 3 was a success rate that exceeded all expectations. 2 young dragons were now in the world, and they had a mother who loved them and a protective father figure who would help raise them. Lily looked at the small dragons and then at the 2 adult dragons and then at Arya. She saw reflected in this moment everything that humans had ever hoped to accomplish. When they ventured out into the stars, she saw connection across impossible differences. She saw new life emerging from despair. She saw proof that love and emotion and commitment could transcend species boundaries and transform worlds. 6 months had passed since Lily first arrived in the cave on Meridian. The young dragons had grown significantly, their scales becoming more defined and their movements more coordinated. The hatchlings, whom Arya named Storm and Ember Jr., showed personality and emotional response that went far beyond what anyone had expected from dragons of their age. They seemed to understand human speech. They responded to music, and they sought out Lily and Arya for comfort and play. News of what was happening in the cave had spread across Meridian. Other elf communities had learned of the miraculous recovery of the dragon's emotional capacity. Delegations began to arrive at the cave sanctuary, bringing more young dragons that had been on the brink of extinction. Some of these dragons had never tasted food from the wild because they had been raised in captivity, their previous keepers having given up hope for their species. All of them were emotionally hollow in the way that the original dragons had been. Arya worked with Lily to develop a system for teaching multiple dragons simultaneously. They created a larger gathering space in an adjacent cavern, and they established routines that allowed Lily and Arya to work with multiple dragons throughout each day. Lily found that she had become something like a teacher or a guide. She was still fundamentally a scientist, but she had also become something more. She had become a healer, a bridge between species, a translator of emotions. The work was exhausting. Some days Lily would fall asleep the moment she stopped moving, her entire body aching from the physical demands of caring for multiple dragons. Other days she felt so energized by the progress of a particular dragon that she could barely contain her joy. She learned that emotions were not always convenient or manageable. Emotions were powerful and sometimes overwhelming, and she shared this understanding with every dragon she worked with. One afternoon, as Lily was working with a particularly withdrawn dragon named Sapphire, a message arrived from her research vessel. The captain had sent a delegation to the cave sanctuary with urgent news. Earth's government was demanding a formal report on Lily's activities. They wanted to know why she had abandoned her official research position and whether she intended to return to Earth with findings and recommendations. Lily read the message while sitting beside Sapphire, who was slowly beginning to show signs of emotional awakening. The dragon seemed to sense her distraction and made a soft sound of concern. Arya approached and asked what news had come from Earth. When Lily explained, the elf woman's expression grew serious. She said that the government was probably concerned about what Lily's activities might mean for their political and economic goals. They wanted to know if dragons could still be valuable assets to human civilization. Lily realized in that moment that she had to make a choice. She could return to Earth and present her findings as a scientific discovery that could benefit humanity. She could potentially gain fame and recognition for her work. She could resume a comfortable life in human society, or she could stay on Meridian and continue the work of emotional restoration, knowing that she might never receive credit or recognition for what she was accomplishing. She looked at Sapphire and saw in the dragon's eyes the emergence of something that looked remarkably like hope. She thought about Ocean and Ember, and the two young dragons who had been born into a world where they could finally feel emotions. She thought about all the dragons yet to come, all the beings whose lives could be transformed by what she was learning to do. Lily wrote a response to Earth's government. She explained that she had discovered something far more important than any economic or political advantage. She had discovered that consciousness was fundamentally connected to emotion, and that beings who had been written off as lost could be saved through connection and dedication. She wrote that she was choosing to remain on Meridian for as long as she was needed, and that her findings would be revolutionary for how humanity understood consciousness and emotion across different species. She concluded her message with a statement that seemed to surprise even herself as she wrote it. She said that she had discovered her true purpose on this world, and that no amount of recognition or comfort could compare to the fulfillment she felt in this work. She said that she had decided to make Meridian her home. After sending the message, Lily waited for anxiety to wash over her. She had just essentially given up her entire life on Earth. She had committed herself to a dangerous alien world where the climate was harsh and the future was uncertain. But instead of anxiety, she felt a profound sense of peace. This decision felt right in a way that nothing else in her life ever had. Arya found Lily sitting alone in the main cavern that evening. The elf woman sat beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. She said that she had always known Lily would make this choice. She said that sometimes the universe brought the right being to the right place at exactly the right time, and that Lily had been meant to come to Meridian all along. The following weeks brought more changes to the sanctuary. Word continued to spread about the dragon's emotional recovery. Scientists from across Meridian arrived to study what was happening. Artists came seeking inspiration from the dragon's newfound capacity for creative expression through song and movement. Other humans from Earth began to arrive, drawn by stories of Lily's work and eager to understand what was happening on this mysterious world. But Lily remained focused on the dragons. She continued to work with each individual creature, helping them develop their emotional capacity and their sense of self. She celebrated with them as they grew stronger and healthier. She watched as some of them began to show romantic interest in each other, and she understood that eventually, more eggs would be laid, and more dragons would be born into a world where emotions were possible and beautiful and fundamental to existence. One evening, as Lily was settling down to sleep in the cave that had become her home, all the dragons emerged from their resting areas. There were now over 20 dragons in the sanctuary. They gathered around her and began to vocalize, creating a symphony of sounds that had become increasingly complex and emotionally expressive. The dragons sang a melody that seemed to tell the story of transformation and healing, of despair transformed into hope, of consciousness awakening after centuries of sleep. Lily wept as she listened to them. She wept because the moment was beautiful beyond words. She wept because she understood that these beings had trusted her and allowed her to help them recover something precious and essential to their nature. She wept because she had finally found where she belonged, among these magnificent creatures and with Arya, in a cave on an alien world where impossible things had become real through dedication and love and the unwavering belief that even the most hopeless situations could be transformed through genuine connection and emotional authenticity. She had taught the dragons to feel, but in the end they had taught her what it truly meant to live.